My name is Laureen Mitchell, and at 23, I had just graduated from Northwestern State University with highest honors after 4 grueling years of balancing academics with family obligations. What should have been the proudest moment of my life turned into a nightmare at Romano's Italian Bistro, where my family had gathered to celebrate my achievement. My father, Richard, raised his wine glass with that familiar smirk I'd grown to dread and announced to the table, "Congratulations, sweetheart, but you're old enough now to pay rent or get out." My mother, Patricia, nodded silently beside him, while my younger brother Connor rolled his eyes and muttered, "Welcome to the real world, sis." They had absolutely no idea that I'd been secretly planning for this exact moment for months. They didn't know I already owned my own 3-bedroom house in Maplewood Heights, complete with a 2-car garage and a backyard perfect for barbecues. The look on their faces the next morning when I packed my Ford Escape and moved out would be worth every penny I'd saved in my hidden account. Growing up in suburban Cleveland, we looked like the picture-perfect middle-class American family. Dad worked as a senior project manager at TechFlow Solutions, while Mom held a part-time position at the Westlake Public Library. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial with white picket fences and took annual vacations to Myrtle Beach. Christmas mornings were filled with wrapped presents under a perfectly decorated tree, and birthday parties were elaborate affairs with homemade cakes and neighborhood friends. But when I turned 15, everything changed. Dad came home one gray October afternoon with defeat written across his face. He'd been laid off after 12 years with the company. Mom immediately picked up extra hours at the library, but her salary barely covered our grocery bill, let alone the $2,400 monthly mortgage payment. "It's just temporary," Dad assured us over dinner that night, cutting into Mom's famous meatloaf. "I'll find something better soon." But something better never came. Months dragged by, and the only positions Dad could secure paid half his previous salary. His pride took a devastating hit, and I'd often find him hunched over our Dell computer late at night, the blue glow illuminating his frustrated expression as he scrolled through job listings on Monster.com. The cheerful atmosphere in our home gradually gave way to hushed arguments after Connor and I went to bed. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter like unwanted guests, and the carefree laughter that once filled our hallways was replaced by tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. By my 16th birthday, I knew I had to step up. I applied for a job at Kroger, bagging groceries after school and on weekends. My first paycheck was $127.50, and I proudly handed every dollar to Mom. "Oh honey, you should keep this for yourself," she said, but I could see the relief flooding her green eyes. "I want to help, Mom," I insisted, squeezing her hand. "We're family." What started as a gesture of love and solidarity soon became an unspoken expectation that would define the next 7 years of my life. Little did I know, this moment of generosity would trap me in a cycle that nearly cost me my future, until I finally found the courage to break free. What began as helping during a crisis quickly transformed into something much more demanding and suffocating. When the electricity bill arrived with a bright red "Final Notice" stamp, Dad looked directly at me across our breakfast table. "Laureen, can you chip in this month? Just until I get back on my feet." I didn't hesitate. I picked up additional shifts at Kroger and added a weekend job waiting tables at Denny's on Route 20. My grades dropped from straight A's to mostly B's, but I managed to maintain a respectable 3.4 GPA despite working nearly 35 hours a week while juggling AP classes and college prep. By my senior year at Lincoln High, I was essentially functioning as a third parent. I paid for my own clothes, school supplies, prom dress, and senior photos, plus contributed roughly $400 monthly to household expenses. Dad had found work at a smaller tech company earning about 60% of his previous salary, and Mom was still at the library, but somehow our financial situation never seemed to improve. What I didn't realize then was that Dad had developed a serious gambling problem. He'd stop at the Horseshoe Casino on his way home from work, convinced he could win back everything we'd lost. Mom later confessed she knew but felt powerless to confront him. Each time he'd promise it was his last visit, and within days he'd return to the slot machines and blackjack tables. Meanwhile, Connor seemed completely oblivious to our struggles. 3 years younger than me, He was sheltered from the harsh reality of our situation. While I worked double shifts and survived on energy drinks and granola bars, he played Xbox with friends and complained about having the old iPhone model. When he wanted the latest PlayStation for Christmas, somehow the money materialized. When I needed new work shoes, I bought them myself with tip money from Denny's. "Your brother's still a kid," Mom would explain when I pointed out the obvious disparity. "Let him enjoy his childhood while he can." So I did. I worked and studied and kept our household functioning. I watched Dad become increasingly dependent on my income, not as temporary assistance, but as a permanent solution to his financial irresponsibility. I observed Mom enabling his destructive behavior while expecting adult-level sacrifice from me. And I noticed how they treated Connor and me completely differently, demanding mature responsibility from me while allowing him teenage freedoms I'd never experienced. When college acceptance letters arrived during my senior spring, I had multiple options thanks to my strong academics and community service record. But the full scholarship to Northwestern State made the decision simple. I couldn't abandon my family financially, even though part of me desperately wanted to escape to somewhere far away. "You've always been our responsible one," Dad said when I announced my decision to stay local. What he really meant was, "You've always been our reliable source of income." I moved into Henderson Hall on campus but returned home every weekend to work my jobs and send money for bills. I called daily to check on everyone and remained the dutiful daughter while watching my roommates enjoy typical college experiences. Parties I declined for extra shifts, spring break trips that were impossible when property taxes were due. Through it all, I told myself it was temporary, that once I graduated and found a good job, things would change. But deep down, I was starting to realize an uncomfortable truth. Nothing would change unless I changed it. College was supposed to be my gateway to independence, but instead it became another complex obligation to balance. My typical Tuesday started at 5 a.m. I'd shower quickly and review notes for my 8 a.m. marketing fundamentals class while eating a protein bar and downing coffee from my beat-up Keurig. After class, I'd rush to my campus job at the Alumni Relations Office, working from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. answering phones and updating donor databases. Then it was afternoon classes until 5, a quick dinner of cup noodles in my dorm, and studying until midnight. Weekends offered zero relief. Friday evenings meant driving my Honda Civic straight to Denny's for the dinner rush. Saturdays were 12-hour shifts at Kroger, and Sundays split between the Sunday brunch crowd at Denny's and doing laundry before heading back to campus. My roommate, Brittany, would often be starting her weekend fun when I was collapsing from exhaustion. "You know this isn't normal, right?" she said one Sunday evening as I stumbled into our room, my feet aching from serving tables for 6 straight hours. "Most college students aren't paying their parents' electric bill and car insurance," she continued, watching me count crumpled dollar bills from tips. I just shrugged, too tired to defend what had become my normal. "They need help," I mumbled, but Brittany's questions stuck with me. Why was it all on me? Dad had a job. Mom worked. Connor was 17 and definitely old enough to contribute something. The truth was, I'd never questioned this arrangement. It had evolved so gradually that I hadn't noticed when helping during an emergency became being the family's primary financial support. I was now covering the internet bill, often the grocery bill, and frequently bailing them out when the mortgage payment came up short. "The cable's getting shut off," Mom would text. "Can you send $180? Or Dad's Chevy needs new brakes. Can you help with the $600 repair bill?" Each request came with the assumption that I'd comply immediately, and I always did. During my junior year, these requests intensified. I was regularly sending nearly 75% of my earnings home, keeping barely enough for ramen noodles and used textbooks. That's when Brittany staged what she called an intervention. "This has to stop," she declared, cornering me in our dorm room. "You're destroying yourself while your family takes complete advantage." "They're not taking advantage," I protested weakly. "They're struggling." "Then why isn't Connor helping? Why did your dad just post photos of his new Samsung TV on Facebook? Why did your mom check in at that expensive spa downtown last weekend?" Had no answers. The TV had appeared the same week I'd sent money for what Dad called emergency utilities. The spa day happened after I'd contributed to what Mom described as a desperate situation with the water heater. "You need to start protecting yourself," Brittany insisted. "Open a separate account they don't know about. Save something, even if it's just $50 a month." That night, I walked to the Chase Bank branch near campus and opened a savings account. I set up direct deposit so 20% of my earnings went directly there before I could be tempted to send it home. It wasn't much initially, but it was mine alone. The first money that truly belonged to me in years. As my junior year progressed, I connected with Amanda Rodriguez, a financial advisor who led a workshop called Money Management for College Students in the Student Union. Amanda reviewed my situation with genuine concern, her eyebrows raising as I explained my family's financial dependency on me. "Laureen, you've essentially taken on adult financial responsibilities while you're still establishing yourself," she observed, reviewing the notebook where I'd tracked every dollar sent home. "This pattern will continue indefinitely unless you make some serious changes." With Amanda's guidance, I began educating myself about personal finance through books like The Total Money Makeover and online courses about budgeting and investing. We created a strategic plan for gradually reducing my family contributions while building my own financial foundation. "Your first responsibility has to be to yourself," Amanda reminded me during our weekly meetings at the campus Starbucks. "You can't help others if you're financially drowning." By my senior year, my secret savings account had grown to $18,000. Money I'd squirreled away from my internship at Morrison Marketing Group, tips from Denny's, and careful budgeting. The marketing firm had been so impressed with my work ethic that they offered me a full-time position starting at $58,000 annually upon graduation. For the first time since I was 15, I could envision a future that wasn't entirely defined by my family's needs and crises. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to buy a house. Amanda helped me research the process, and I connected with David Kim, a real estate agent who specialized in first-time homebuyers. "With your credit score, savings, and job offer, you're in an excellent position," he assured me during our initial meeting at his office in downtown Westerville. We looked at properties in Maplewood Heights, a growing suburb about 15 minutes from campus with tree-lined streets and reasonable home prices. After viewing a dozen houses, I found it. A charming 3-bedroom ranch with a fireplace, updated kitchen, and a backyard perfect for future barbecues and maybe even a garden. The asking price was $185,000, and with my down payment plus a first-time homebuyer program, I qualified for financing with payments lower than what Dad was planning to charge me for rent in my childhood bedroom. 3 months before graduation, I closed on the house in complete secrecy. Only Brittany and Amanda knew. I arranged the closing during spring break, telling my family I was working extra shifts to save money for post-graduation expenses. Which was technically true. Signing those mortgage papers with trembling hands was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "This is the beginning of your truly independent life," Amanda said as she witnessed my signature on the final documents. I kept the house empty for those final months, occasionally visiting to sit on the hardwood floors of what would soon be my living room, planning where furniture would go and how I'd decorate once I could afford it. But mostly, I prepared myself mentally for the inevitable confrontation when my family discovered I was cutting financial ties. Graduation was approaching, and with it, the reckoning I both dreaded and desperately needed. The stage was set for the conversation that would either destroy our family relationships or finally force them into something healthier and more sustainable. Either way, I was ready to reclaim my life. Graduation day at Northwestern State dawned crisp and clear, with that perfect May weather that made everything feel possible. I put on my cap and gown in Henderson Hall, my emotions a tangled mess of pride, anxiety, and anticipation. Today was about celebrating my achievement, but I knew the real test would come at dinner. The ceremony was held on the main quad, with rows of folding chairs facing a stage decorated in our school colors of blue and gold. As I took my place among my fellow graduates, I spotted my family in the crowd. Mom was waving enthusiastically with tears in her eyes. Dad was checking emails on his phone, and Connor looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. When they called Laureen Marie Mitchell, Bachelor of Business Administration, magna cum laude, I walked across that stage with my head high, accepting my diploma with a firm handshake and a smile that came from deep within. This achievement was mine alone, earned through years of sacrifice, determination, and sheer willpower. After the ceremony, my parents found me in the sea of graduates and families. Mom hugged me tightly while Dad clapped my shoulder. "We're so incredibly proud," Mom said, her voice thick with genuine emotion. "4 years went by fast," Dad added. "Time to join the real world now." Connor gave me a quick hug and immediately asked, "Can we go eat? I'm starving." They'd made reservations at Olive Garden. Not the fanciest place in town, but a step up from our usual dining choices. As we were seated, Dad made a show of announcing to our server, "We're celebrating our daughter's college graduation today. Congratulations." Maria, our server, replied with a warm smile. "First round of drinks is on the house." Dad ordered an expensive bottle of wine. Mom chose the seafood Alfredo, and Connor selected the most expensive steak on the menu. I chose simple chicken parmigiana, already calculating how much this celebration would cost me, because despite Dad's grand announcement about treating me, I knew exactly who'd be paying. Throughout the appetizers and salads, conversation remained light. Mom asked about my classmates, Dad inquired about the graduation speakers, and Connor complained about sitting in the sun for 3 hours. Notably, no one asked about my job plans or future goals. As our entrees arrived, Dad cleared his throat and raised his wine glass. "A toast to our graduate. Laureen, we can't express how proud we are of everything you've accomplished." I smiled and raised my glass, allowing myself a moment of genuine warmth and connection with my family. "You've always been responsible," Dad continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Always thinking of family first. That's rare these days when young people only think about themselves." My stomach tightened. I knew exactly where this was headed. "But graduation marks a real transition to full adulthood," he continued. "And with that comes adult responsibilities and expectations." Here it comes, I thought. "Your mother and I have discussed it thoroughly, and we think it's time you started contributing more formally to household expenses. You're old enough now to pay rent or get out." The restaurant noise seemed to fade as I stared at my father, his matter-of-fact expression treating this ultimatum like discussing the weather rather than dismissing 7 years of my financial sacrifice. The moment of truth had finally arrived. The silence at our table stretched uncomfortably as Dad's ultimatum hung in the air. Around us, other families celebrated their graduates with laughter and joy, oblivious to the tension at our corner booth. "We think $900 a month is reasonable," Dad continued, cutting his lasagna as if he were discussing the weather. "Plus continuing to help with utilities, of course. You'll be making good money now, and this will still be cheaper than getting your own place." Connor smirked. "Welcome to adult life, sis." I looked at Mom, hoping for some recognition of how insane this demand was, but she was studiously examining her seafood Alfredo. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the anger building inside me. "After supporting this family financially through high school and college, working multiple jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, you now want me to pay you $900 monthly rent plus utilities?" "Don't be dramatic, Laureen," Dad replied dismissively. "We've supported you your entire life. Roof over your head, food on the table. Now it's time for you to do your part." I wanted to scream. I wanted to list every dollar I'd contributed over 7 years. I wanted to throw his expensive wine in his face and walk out. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "I'll think about it." That seemed to satisfy him, and conversation moved on to Connor's summer plans. Apparently a road trip to California that my parents were funding. I sat in silence, pushing chicken around my plate, appetite completely gone. When the check arrived, Maria placed it in front of Dad with another congratulations. He glanced at the $184 total, then slid it across to me with a wink. "Consider this your first adult expense." I placed my debit card on the bill without comment, ignoring Connor's satisfied smirk and Mom's uncomfortable glance away. The drive home was silent except for the radio playing softly. I stared out the window, mentally reviewing my secret savings account balance and my mortgage payments. By the time we pulled into our driveway, my decision was crystal clear. Tomorrow would be moving day whether they were ready or not. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Connor and I had stuck to the ceiling years ago. Dad's casual dismissal of my contributions replayed endlessly. The entitlement in his voice. Mom's complicit silence. Connor's smugness. 6 months earlier, I'd sat in Amanda's office, nervously twisting tissues in my hands. I need to make a change, I'd told her, but I'm terrified of what it'll do to my family. Amanda had looked at me with compassion but firmness. Laureen, we've reviewed your finances together. Do you realize you've contributed over $35,000 to your family while taking on student debt and working yourself to exhaustion? I see parents who've learned to expect this support as their right, and a pattern that will continue indefinitely unless you break it. Now, lying in the dark, I remembered her words. You have enough saved for a house down payment. You have a job offer. You have everything you need to start your independent life. At 6 a.m., I rose quietly and began packing my belongings, ready to shock my family with the truth they never saw coming. At 6 a.m. sharp, I started moving my belongings downstairs. After living in this house for 18 years, I was surprised by how little I actually owned. My clothes fit into 3 suitcases, my books and personal items filled 4 boxes, and my jewelry, mostly inexpensive pieces I'd bought myself, fit in a small case. By 7:30, everything was stacked neatly by the front door. I could hear Mom's familiar footsteps in the kitchen and the coffee maker gurgling to life. Taking a deep breath, I carried the first suitcase downstairs. Mom looked up from the kitchen table, surprise crossing her face. You're up early, honey. Want some coffee? No thanks, Mom. I'm moving out today. Her coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. What? Because of what your father said last night. Sweetie, he didn't mean you had to leave immediately. I know, I replied, setting the suitcase by the front door. But I've been planning this for months. It's time. She followed me as I went back upstairs for the second suitcase. But where will you go? Do you have an apartment lined up? You can't just leave without a plan. I smiled despite the tension. She genuinely had no idea I was capable of making plans without their knowledge or approval. I have a place, I said simply. By now, the commotion had awakened Dad and Connor. Dad appeared in the hallway, hair disheveled, bathrobe hastily tied. What's going on? He demanded. Laureen says she's moving out, Mom explained, wringing her hands nervously. Dad looked at my suitcases, then at me. His expression shifting from confusion to anger. Because of last night. For crying out loud, we were just discussing adult responsibilities. There's no need for dramatics. This isn't about last night, I said, returning upstairs for my boxes. This has been my plan for months. I start my new job Monday, and I need to be settled before then. New job. Dad followed me upstairs. What new job? And what place? You can't afford your own place yet. You need to build savings first. The irony of him lecturing me about savings when he'd systematically drained mine for years was almost laughable. My place is all taken care of, I said, lifting a box of books. I've been saving and planning. Saving. Dad's voice rose. How could you be saving when you've been helping with our expenses? I didn't answer, focusing instead on getting my belongings downstairs. The moving company would arrive at 9 a.m. sharp. Moving company. Mom's voice was faint. Laureen, this is all so sudden. It wasn't sudden to me. It was the culmination of years of growing awareness and months of careful planning. But I understood that to them it seemed to come from nowhere. They'd never considered that I might have a life separate from their needs. You'll still help with bills, right? Dad asked, his anger giving way to panic. Even if you're not living here. And there it was, not concern for my well-being or sadness at my departure, but immediate worry about how my decision would affect their finances. "No," I said, the single word feeling like both betrayal and liberation. "I won't be paying your bills anymore." The profound silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. My new life was about to begin.